the North Sea, November 1942. The water is black and absolute. Somewhere beneath the surface, moving at 4 knots through freezing darkness, a vessel that does not officially exist is carrying men who are not officially there, towards a coastline that will kill them if anything goes wrong. Inside the pressure hull, the air is thick with diesel fumes and the particular silence of men who have stopped talking because there is nothing left to say. They have memorized their cover stories. They have destroyed their real papers. They carry forged identity documents, civilian clothes, and the quiet knowledge that if they are captured, the Geneva Convention will not protect them. They are not soldiers in any sense the enemy is obliged to recognize. They are agents, and the submarine sliding through the darkness beneath the German-patrolled waters of occupied Europe is the only thing standing between them and certain death. The submarine has no name that will appear in any public record for another 40 years. The mission it is running tonight will not be acknowledged by the government that ordered it. The men it is carrying will not be decorated in any public ceremony. And yet what is happening in this freezing, black, impossibly dangerous stretch of water is one of the most consequential and least understood chapters of the entire Second World War. This is the story of Britain's clandestine submarine operations, of the vessels specially converted, the crews specially selected, and the agents specially trained to conduct warfare of a kind that conventional military thinking could barely accommodate. It is a story of extraordinary technical improvisation, of human courage operating at the outermost boundary of what courage can sustain, and of a chapter of naval history so thoroughly buried in official secrecy that even now, decades after the relevant files were opened, the full picture remains stubbornly incomplete. To understand why Britain needed submarines that could carry spies, you must first understand the particular problem that the Special Operations Executive faced in the autumn and winter of 1940. The SOE had been created in July of that year on Churchill's direct instruction, with a mandate that was remarkable in its bluntness. It was to set Europe ablaze, to organise, supply and coordinate resistance movements across every occupied territory, to sabotage German industry, disrupt communications, and keep alive the capacity for armed resistance in countries that had been overrun by a military machine of staggering efficiency. The problem was geography. Getting agents into occupied Europe required crossing frontiers that the Germans patrolled with obsessive thoroughness. The air route, dropping agents by parachute from modified RAF aircraft, was dangerous, imprecise, and entirely dependent on weather conditions, and the availability of aircraft that Bomber Command was extremely reluctant to divert from other purposes. An agent dropped by parachute landed where the wind took him, often miles from the intended point, and had to make his way to his contact entirely on his own resources. The failure rate was high, the loss rate was higher. The sea route offered different possibilities and different problems. A small boat, a full-bottom canoe, or a swimmer could approach a coastline with a precision that a parachute could never match. An agent delivered by sea arrived at a specific beach at a specific time, met by a specific contact, with his equipment intact and his cover story untested by the chaos of an emergency landing. The problem was getting close enough to the coastline to make the final delivery without being detected by German coastal patrols, radar stations, or the aircraft that swept the Channel and North Sea with increasing regularity from 1941 onwards. A surface vessel could not do it. The coastal waters of occupied Europe were among the most dangerous in the world for Allied shipping. Motor torpedo boats could approach quickly and withdraw quickly, but their noise and their wake made them detectable at distances that made clandestine work extraordinarily difficult. What was needed was something that could travel submerged, invisible to radar and to the naked eye alike, and surface only at the final moment, close inshore in darkness, in weather conditions that kept the German patrols inside their blockhouses. What was needed, in other words, was a submarine purpose-built or purpose-converted for human delivery. The vessels that emerged from this requirement were unlike anything in the standard Royal Navy inventory. The submarines selected for clandestine operations were drawn primarily from the T-class and S-class boats that formed the backbone of Britain's wartime submarine fleet. But the conversion process transformed them into something considerably more specialised. The modifications were carried out at yards, including Chatham and Devonport, under conditions of strict secrecy, with workers compartmentalised so that no single individual understood the full extent of what was being built. The most significant technical modification was the installation of what was designated the operational passage compartment, a pressure-tight container built into the casing of the submarine, forward of the conning tower, capable of accommodating between 4 and 8 fully equipped agents along with their equipment containers. The compartment measured roughly 4 meters in length and just under a meter in internal diameter, tight enough that a broad-shouldered man had to enter sideways, long enough that the occupants could lie in shifts during extended passage. The compartment was sealed from outside, ventilated through connections to the submarine's main air supply, and fitted with a simple release mechanism that could be operated from within when the vessel surfaced at the delivery point. The engineering challenge was considerable. The compartment had to withstand the pressures encountered at the submarine's operational diving depth, in the case of the S-class boats, routinely between 60 and 90 meters, while remaining habitable for human occupants for periods of up to 18 hours. It had to be waterproof at depth and openable quickly at the surface. It had to be fitted in a position that did not compromise the submarine's trim, its diving characteristics, or its capacity to fight if intercepted. And it had to be invisible to aerial reconnaissance, a smooth, streamlined addition to a hull that already had a complex external profile. The solution developed by the naval architects at the Admiralty's experimental works at Haslar was elegant in its simplicity. The compartment was constructed from high-tensile steel plate of 8 millimeters thickness, formed into a cylinder with hemispherical end caps and welded into recesses cut into the pressure hull casing. The external profile was faired in with shaped timber and lead sheeting, painted to match the submarine's standard grey and indistinguishable from the surrounding casing in any photograph taken at normal reconnaissance distances. The ventilation connections ran through the pressure hull via glands that were standard components used elsewhere in the vessel's construction, providing no external indication of the compartment's unusual purpose. The human compartment was not the only modification. Submarines tasked with clandestine operations were also fitted with enlarged stowage for full-bot canoes, collapsible two-man kayaks that could be assembled on the casing while the submarine lay stopped on the surface and then paddled inshore by agents and their naval handlers. The full-bot had a draft of just 12 centimeters and a radar cross-section so small as to be effectively undetectable by the technology of the period. It was silent, maneuverable in shallow water, and capable of carrying 2 men and roughly 40 kilograms of equipment. It was also, in anything above a Force 3 sea state, extremely difficult to handle safely, and the training required to use it effectively in pitch darkness on a hostile coastline was rigorous to a degree that eliminated a significant proportion of candidates before they ever went near an enemy coast. The crews of the clandestine submarines were selected through a process that the Royal Navy approached with characteristic understatement. Commanding officers were chosen for a combination of technical skill, personal temperament, and what one Admiralty document describes with admirable restraint as a tolerance for irregular operational conditions. What this meant in practice was a capacity to operate for extended periods without communication with shore authorities, to make independent decisions in situations that no training exercise had anticipated, and to exercise the particular kind of judgment required when the safety of an entire crew depended on decisions that could not be referred upwards. The actual delivery operations followed a pattern, refined through hard experience, over the course of 1941 and 1942. The submarine would approach the target coastline submerged during daylight hours, navigating by dead reckoning supplemented by careful periscope, observation of coastal landmarks. As darkness fell, the vessel would rise to periscope depth and the commanding officer would make a final assessment of conditions: wind state, sea state, the presence or absence of German patrol vessels, the visibility of the agreed recognition signals from the shore party. If conditions were acceptable, the submarine would surface, the casing party would emerge, the full-bot would be assembled and launched, and the agents would paddle for the shore. While the submarine remained stopped on the surface, crew closed up at diving stations, ready to dive in an instant if a patrol appeared. The waiting, by all accounts, was the worst part. A surface submarine is extraordinarily vulnerable. It cannot fight effectively. It cannot maneuver at useful speed. It presents a profile visible at considerable distance to any vessel or aircraft that happens to pass. The commanding officer, standing on the bridge with binoculars and a stopwatch, could do nothing but wait and watch the darkness for the torch signal from the shore that would indicate the agents had landed safely. Until that signal came, or until circumstances made waiting impossible, the submarine sat on the surface, and the crew sat with their hearts in their mouths. The operations conducted by these submarines between 1941 and 1944 touched nearly every occupied coastline in Europe. Norway received the largest number of deliveries, for reasons that combined strategic importance. The Norwegian coastline provided intelligence on German naval movements that was of critical value to the Battle of the Atlantic. With practical advantage, the deeply indented fjord coastline offered hiding places for surfaced submarines that the flatter shores of France and the Low Countries could not match. Agents were delivered to contact points from Stavanger in the south to Tromsø in the far north, in conditions that ranged from the merely dangerous to the genuinely appalling. France received a significant number of operations directed at the Atlantic coast and the Mediterranean shore. The Breton coastline was a particular focus, its offshore islands and shallow inlets providing cover for deliveries to SOE networks operating in Brittany and further inland. The Mediterranean operations, conducted by submarines based at Malta and later at Algiers, serviced networks in southern France, Corsica, and the Italian mainland, with deliveries timed to coincide with windows in Italian and German coastal patrol schedules that agents ashore had painstakingly established and communicated back through wireless sets. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The German response to clandestine submarine operations evolved as the war progressed, and German intelligence became aware that something beyond ordinary naval activity was occurring on their occupied coastlines. The initial reaction was to increase the frequency and coverage of coastal patrols, which had the effect of making individual operations more dangerous without preventing them. The detection technology available to German coastal forces in 1941 and 1942 was not well suited to identifying a stationary submarine on the surface at night, and the Folbok canoe was essentially undetectable by any means available to a patrol vessel operating in darkness. By 1943, German coastal radar had improved substantially, and the window of surface time available to a clandestine submarine had shortened accordingly. Operations that had previously allowed 20 or 30 minutes on the surface were now being completed in 10 minutes or fewer, with the consequence that the margin for error in Folbok operations became extremely slim. The agents who trained at the special training schools in Scotland during this period were put through increasingly demanding exercises in night navigation and small boat handling, with instructors who had themselves participated in actual operations setting standards that would have seemed unreasonable in peacetime. The American approach to the same problem differed in ways that reflected both different strategic priorities and different technical traditions. The Office of Strategic Services, the American counterpart to the SOE, relied more heavily on air delivery throughout the war, partly because the United States possessed a greater surplus of suitable aircraft, and partly because the OSS was considerably younger than the SOE as an organisation and had less time to develop the infrastructure for maritime delivery. American submarine operations in European waters were largely conducted in collaboration with British vessels and under British operational control until well into 1943. The OSS did develop its own maritime capability, centred on a flotilla of small surface craft based in North Africa and later in southern Italy. But this was surface rather than submarine work, and carried correspondingly higher risks during the approach phase. The Soviet Union, despite conducting extensive partisan supply operations on land, made relatively little use of submarine delivery for intelligence agents, preferring to rely on overland infiltration across the enormous land frontiers that Soviet-controlled territory shared with occupied areas. The geography was simply different. The specific problem that British submarines were solving, penetrating a coastline thoroughly controlled by a maritime power with significant surface and air patrol capability, was not one that the Soviet Union faced in the same form. Assessing the actual impact of clandestine submarine operations on the outcome of the war requires care. The temptation, given the extraordinary drama of the individual operations, is to overstate their significance. The truth is more nuanced. The intelligence gathered by networks supplied and maintained through submarine deliveries was, in specific instances, of extraordinary value. The Norwegian network's reporting on German naval movements contributed materially to operations in the Atlantic. The networks in southern France provided targeting information that shaped Allied bombing operations. Individual acts of sabotage carried out by agents who had arrived by submarine disrupted German logistics in ways that were disproportionate to the numbers involved. But the cumulative weight of these contributions was structural rather than decisive. No single submarine delivery turned the course of the war. What the clandestine submarine program achieved was the maintenance of a capacity for resistance and intelligence gathering across occupied Europe that would otherwise have been impossible to sustain. It kept networks alive that would otherwise have withered. It delivered equipment that enabled operations that would otherwise not have occurred. It signalled to agents operating in conditions of extraordinary isolation and danger that they had not been forgotten, that a vessel had crossed hostile waters specifically to bring them what they needed. That signal, impossible to quantify, may have been the programme's most important contribution of all. Two of the submarines that conducted clandestine operations survive in some form today. HMS Alliance, a late-war A-class boat that participated in operations in the final stages of the conflict, is preserved at the Royal Navy Submarine Museum in Gosport, where visitors can walk through a pressure hull and begin to understand what the space inside a wartime submarine actually meant for the men who lived and worked within it. The museum holds an extensive archive of documentation relating to clandestine operations, some of it only partially declassified, a reminder that the full history of these missions remains in certain details officially incomplete. Return now to that black water, to November 1942, to the submarine that does not officially exist, carrying men who are not officially there, towards a coastline that will kill them if anything goes wrong. The Folbot is in the water now. Two men are paddling towards the shore in absolute silence. 12 centimetres of hull between them and the North Sea, 40 kilograms of equipment stowed behind them, a cover story memorised to the point of involuntary reflex. And ahead of them, somewhere in the darkness, a figure standing on a beach who will either show them a torch in a particular sequence or will not be there at all. And if he is not there, they will turn around and try to find the submarine again in the darkness and hope that it is still waiting. The submarine is still waiting. The commanding officer is on the bridge with his binoculars and his stopwatch. The crew is closed up at diving stations. Nobody is speaking. The only sounds are the water against the hull and the breathing of men who are doing the thing they were trained to do, which is to wait and to watch and to be ready. This is what clandestine submarine operations actually looked like. Not the clean heroism of later dramatizations, not the polished efficiency of training exercises conducted in peacetime, but this: a freezing night, a black sea, men in a canoe paddling towards a coast that will kill them, and a submarine on the surface waiting for a signal that may never come. The signal comes, the agents are ashore, the Folbot is retrieved, the submarine dives, the water closes over it and it is gone, leaving no trace of its presence on the surface of a sea that keeps its secrets as thoroughly as the government that sent it. Britain fought the war in many ways. In the air, on the land, on and beneath the surface of every ocean that German power touched. But it also fought it in this way. Silently, secretly, in the freezing darkness, with vessels that didn't officially exist, carrying men who weren't officially there. And when the history of how Britain endured and ultimately prevailed is written in its fullest and most honest form, those submarines, and those men, will be somewhere near the centre of it. Somewhere near the centre, and still in certain details in the dark.